What's going on, guys? Aaron from Top Tier Gaming here, and today I'm coming at you with the final tier list for the post-ban list sort of updating of the tier lists. This will be the Board Breakers tier list, and of course this is going to be for the format that is essentially post-ban list, but I'm also going to include Legacy of Destruction. Since we are so close to that set's release, I want to bring information based around what we could be seeing, like meta impacts with that set as well. You know, we have Tenpai coming out, you know, Melodious. A bunch of decks also just get support in that set, so I do want to talk about that set as far as it pertains to Board Breakers. And yeah, I think this tier list is going to be particularly interesting because we have been in such a heavy hand trap format recently, but I think there is a solid chance we shift to Board Breakers, so I do want to say my thoughts on what I think the best going into a Board Breaker format with all the current decks right now could look like. So with all that being said, if you do enjoy this type of Yu-Gi-Oh content, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me out and what I do here on the channel. Going through the tiers, we have meta, strong options. These are ones that, like, these tiers are for decks you're definitely maining or side decking if you choose to go the Board Breaker route. Okay options are if you want like even more Board Breakers and you want to dip into the like less playable ones, or the ones that maybe aren't the highest impact but you just want a certain amount of Board Breakers, or cards that, like, based on what deck you're playing, or like the more niche options, because I also have depends on deck, which is more for depending on the deck you're playing, it could be good. And then I have not this format, which are just cards that are not going to work as Board Breakers in the current, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh environment that we're in. So with all that being said, the first card I have on this list is Alpha, and I'm going to pair Alpha and Pankratops together because they fulfill a similar role. I think Pankratops is okay, and I think Alpha depends on deck. Like, Alpha in certain decks with like beasts is functional, but honestly I don't think even in the decks Alpha is good in right now that it's worth playing. I think there's just better options, so I'm gonna say Alpha is just not this format. And Pankratops is like okay, it's fine, it fills like a bunch of roles. Next, I'll sort of rank the book cards, just getting through some of the very standard ones we go through every tier list. The books I think are like they're just okay. They're not like horrible. Okay, this one's horrible. This one more depends on deck. No, this one's horrible. Like, even in the decks like Phantom Knights where this card is good, I wouldn't say it's that great. These are okay. They still function as like go first and go second cards, and I think they might get a little better. Honestly, the more I talk about these Book of Moon cards, I just don't think they're super strong. Like, I look at all the decks in the format right now, and you know, going second in a Snake Eye, these book cards don't really do much because they have nothing but links. And like going first, even, they're not that great into certain fusion decks like Branded. They're not that amazing into ritual decks like Voiceless. I don't know, I think the books right now just maybe aren't it, and I'm gonna put them in not this format, just all three of them. Next up, I see Chalice, so we're definitely gonna talk about Droplet and Chalice together. Sort of the effect negates, we'll throw in Dark Ruler as well. There might be another card here that does similar function. I think that's all the effect negate cards, and Chalice is like, we actually saw people playing Chalice at the like Ultimate UDS Championship or whatever that tournament was, near the beginning of the format where some people were still trying to play Board Breakers. I think Chalice is like okay, you know, it trades with Appaloosa, it's like a fine card. I do think Droplets and Dark Ruler are much better because Anti-Spell got hit, and that's huge for Dark Ruler. I think one of the worst things about Dark Ruler was the fact that in formats where Anti-Spell is popular and your opponent is siding it going first, Dark Ruler gets completely shut down. Like, Droplet is still okay, but Dark Ruler gets shut down entirely. I think both of these are going to be very strong, and it sort of depends what deck you're playing. Like, there are certain decks that Droplet fits in with better, like whether you want discard outlets or you have a lot of free cards, like something like Runic. If you're a deck that can't run Droplets, Dark Ruler always seems to be like a better option. And with things like Thunder Dragon, like Colossus being legal, not like Thunder Dragon the deck, but Colossus and whatever deck he's being played in, Dark Ruler is very strong versus that as well, so you're not relying on maybe Imperm or just Droplets, you have Dark Ruler. Cosmic Cyclone, so talking about the Backrow hate, we have Cosmic, we have Feather Duster, we have Lightning Storm, which also doubles as, you know, Monster Destruction, and we have Twin Twister. Twin Twister, not this format, really only good in formats like Prank Kids where they have something you want to hit before the main phase. Cosmic still seems really strong. I think if Fire King Snake Eye truly does become like the best deck in the format, Cosmic might even be like super meta. In fact, as I add more to this tier list, I'll see which ones end up going in meta, because I could find Droplets here as well, potentially. I do think Cosmic is going to be in almost everyone's side. but I'm going to leave it in strong options for now. It's really strong. Feather Duster for sure in meta. Almost every side deck's going to have this card. In my opinion, it's just like, I almost always have Feather Duster in my side deck. Lightning Storm as well seems pretty good. Overall, I think these cards are just fine. Again, Anti-Spell has been hit, and I think these cards obviously benefit from that, but you always want a certain amount of like back row hate for like most events, especially like regionals especially. You want a certain amount of back row hate, and these are just always in my regional side decks, right? So I think these are just the premier back row hate cards right now. Cosmic, I'm still considering putting it up in meta because I think it's really strong. We'll have to see on that one though. I guess in the same category I should be talking about Evenly Matched, because it is often a back row hate card, but it's also with these like monster hate cards, because Evenly, like Lightning Storm, kind of fills both roles. I think Evenly looks pretty strong. It's like solid enough versus Fire King, and it's like okay versus some other decks. The issue is if you like look at the format, it's really not that many back row decks that you want it Evenly. I think Evenly is at least in strong options. I don't know if it'll be in every side deck, but it is very strong. I think I'm gonna have to do some rearranging with this meta and strong options area. They're a little bit harder to rank which ones I think will be in like main decks as opposed to like just some side decks, and that's sort of the differentiating factor between these two. Dark Hole, I'm gonna say, is like, depends on deck. There are certain decks, or, you know, it's really depending on if people decide to play things like Ibly, things like that, which I don't think people are playing Ibly in the near future, so I'm actually just gonna put it in not this format. There are some decks that are fine with Dark Hole, like Dinosaur, which is why I initially put it here, but if there's no Ibly in the format, I don't think Dark Hole's that amazing. And Raigeki is like an okay option. I think Raigeki's fine. It's a solid card. Talents is a very, very powerful card for sure, and we're going to just go through all of our, you know, sort of stealing cards, right? And we have a new one on this tier list, Snatch Steal, because I haven't done a tier list since this card came off the ban list. I guess Enemy Controller is here as well. And these are all pretty powerful, I'm not going to lie. I think all of these cards are insane right now. Talents, in my opinion, meta, there's almost like no reason not to main it in a lot of decks. It's good going first, good going second, and that's really strong. Change of Heart, I also think is really, really good. Right now, it looks like the best way for Snake Eye to end their board is Appaloosa, and they don't have Omni Negates anymore for the most part. I mean, like, the pure deck doesn't have Baron or Savage, right? I don't know if they're going to come up with new ways to put out Omni Negates. I don't think they will, so if your opponent just has Appaloosa, things like Change of Heart, Snatch Steal, and Mind Control are all very strong. Honestly, I think we could see these in a lot of side decks going forward. It is kind of deck dependent. Like, I have some decks where I can't really use the card I take, and I wouldn't side these, but for like a general deck, I think these cards could find themselves in meta. I'm gonna put Mind Control in strong option just because you're playing these three first, in my opinion, and then you'd play Mind Control after, but overall, I think they're all really good. And honestly, I kind of want to talk about Thrust if I've already talked about talents. Oh, you know what? I'll put it next to the Enemy Controller, though, which I think Econ is okay. I think Econ is a little more deck dependent. Like, there's some decks that just don't function well with Enemy Controller, but it is a really good card, and I think its main strength is going first and second, very similar to Droplet. I'm tempted to put it here because Enemy Controller is just really good, but there's, like, so many take cards right now, and I like, versus, I don't know, it's at least as good as Mind Control, right? Like, Enemy Controller is at least as good as Mind Control, but more main deckable because it's good going first. So I think I'll say it's actually better than Mind Control. These I would expect in every side deck, if not, like, you know, I don't think people are going to main these, but if you're going to main one type of card that's not, like, talents here, then Econ is really good, just like Droplets, because it's good going first and second. So yeah, I think Econ's really strong. Thrust, I think, is, you know, honestly, like, it depends on deck. Like, it should be here. Some decks play Thrust, some don't. But I do think if we go to Board Breakers, then, like, Thrust just becomes a really good card. If your deck can play Thrust, like, for a purpose, then Thrust, get Talents or Change of Heart is really strong. You get Mind Control even. More Board Breakers. If Board Breakers come into the meta again, Thrust is usually meta alongside Board Breakers, so that's fair enough. Kurikara is here, so going into the tribute monsters like the Kaijus, the Lava Golem, the Sphere mode. What do I think of these? I mean, Kurikara, I think, depends on deck. I think if you're playing Snake Eye, this card is at least a one of. I think it's, like, fine into the current meta, presumably. It's a pretty solid card overall. So, like, while it does depend on the deck, I think it's just in general a pretty strong option. I think, like, Lava Golem is okay. Here's the thing about Lava Golem is you're giving your opponent a fire. so I don't really like that. And one thing about Kaijus that I want to say is that Pearly did get a buff, right? So Pearly might become like a decent rogue option, and if Pearly does, I want to say Kaijus are okay. I think Sphere Mode is just like a no-go right now, to be honest. I don't think there's a lot of boards where this comes up. I mean, if your deck can play Sphere Mode, I actually don't think it's that bad, like if you just have ways to special summon past it, because if you think of a deck like Snake Eye, it's not something I would side it in for Snake Eye. They usually end with like 2 monsters. Overall, I usually see it where this card just isn't that powerful, because, I mean, if you can catch them where they have Flamberge, Appaloosa, and IP, it's like very good. But this card is interesting versus Voiceless, where they can end like Skull Guardian, Low, and the Saravis, which is pretty good. I think this comes up versus Branded a decent amount. Maybe it's like okay. I mean, I'll throw it in okay. I think it's more deck dependent than the other two. But yeah, I mean, there are situations where this card's strong. Getting into one that's a little more interesting, which I have Engage, sort of showing the Sky Striker package as a going second option. Engage is at 3 now. I think that's really big. Anti-Spell is once again at 1. And Droll, whether or not it's in the format, is going to impact this card a little. That being said, I think it's a very strong option. Like, the versatility the Sky Striker board breaking engine has is pretty strong, because you just play 3 Engage, and then you can play like a Hornet Drones, a Widow Anchor, a Shark Cannon, or even multiple copies of all those. And then Engage just does so much at that point, and I think that's very, very powerful. So I think whether you play this or not is going to be based on how popular Droll is, or whether this like functions well in your deck. But it looks very strong. It's a big package, but Engage is very powerful, and like it gives you access to multiple different interrupts, right? Like if they have Princess Engrave you can't deal with, you can search Shark Cannon, for example. Widow Anchor is just overall pretty good. Again, I think it depends on your deck, but I think this Engage package has some steam going into this format. Herald of the Abyss, I think it all depends on Pearly. Pearly did get a buff, so I'm going to throw it in okay. The Kaiju and the Herald of the Abyss, very similar boats. It just depends on how rogue Pearly is. Like, does the second Delicious really put Pearly up to a threat that might be common? That's yet to be seen, but if it is, I'm going to throw it in okay, because I think it's like fine. If Pearly, if you need to side deck for Pearly, these are like the go-tos more often than not. There are a couple of others, but these are really strong. Magical Spring is a very interesting card, and one I was super excited to add to this tier list because I love this card, and I've never been able to really have it before on a tier list because it's never been that relevant. But right now, there are a lot of decks that make Magical Spring seem very strong. Obviously, Fire King Snake Eye, if they leave Sanctuary up, you're getting 2 to 3 draws with a discard 1. In certain decks, that is beyond bonkers, and this card's insane. This card's very good versus Voiceless Voice, especially post Legacy of Destruction, where, I mean, they get an additional spell, so in their good hands, they might end up with both spells and a trap. And that's, again, 3 draws, and that's really strong. There's a couple of other decks where it's relevant, but I think those are the main 2. I think it's bare minimum strong options. Like, I think depending on the deck you're playing, it might be less good, and depending, you know, if they don't leave Sanctuary on field, it's okay. Sometimes it's, like, just okay versus Voiceless as well. And if you don't profit off discarding by card effect, it becomes less good in your deck as well. Overall, though, I think this card is bare minimum strong options. I think it looks really good in a format. It was okay last format too, but I think this format has a lot going for it because Centurion also wasn't hit, so people might play Centurion. This card's very good versus them. I don't think Centurion is going to be anything more than Rogue if you've seen my deck tier list. Shaddoll Fusion. So initially, when we were first heading into Phantom Nightmare format, a lot of people hyped up Shaddoll Fusion, specifically because of the Fire King version. Now, the Fire King version kind of went by the wayside, but if it's coming back and is a really strong force in the meta, which is pretty predictable that it should be, Shaddoll Fusion as a package might be really good again. You just side 3 Shaddoll Fusion and you play App Clone and you send Ariel and Dragon, and then you can like banish 3 cards in their graveyard, negate something with App Clone, and pop their field spell. That is a lot going on with 1 card, and I think that seems very strong. I do think it's sort of deck dependent. Like this tier, I'm realizing is useless. I might have nothing in this tier now that I'm looking at it, because I mean, these cards all feel strong. Maybe there's too many strong board breakers, but Shaddoll Fusion looks very good on paper, in my opinion. And it can bait Ash Blossom if you're playing a deck where that's relevant. Honestly, like a lot of these cards could have been in Depend on deck, but I think like all of these are pretty generically fine too. Ultimate Slayer is okay. I don't think it's bad. Honestly, maybe I just do this in this tier because just to have something in this tier, because it really does, like, Ultimate Slayer really does depend on the deck you're playing, because if you're playing a deck with a tight extra deck, you're probably never running this card. If you're playing like Fluandereeze, Exosister maybe, there's a few decks that you have like 5 or 6 flex spots, and you can throw in Ultimate Slayer targets or Super Poly targets, and Ultimate Slayer is like pretty good in that case. It's a really strong card versus Snake Eye, to be honest. Like, you can bounce Appaloosa and then draw a card off of your Garura because you send the Bucephalus, right? But I think it depends on your deck. I think Soul Release is okay. I think it's very good versus Fire King Snake Eye, but choosing to play this means you're not running any of these in a slot. I do think Soul Release can come back to the forefront of a side deck card, but I'm not sure it'll be better than these options. Like, it's really good, but it's fine as a thrust target. Like, if you're playing thrust, Soul Release gets better. Maybe you side one Soul Release and that's fine for thrust. I'm still just gonna put it in okay. I don't think you should be playing multiple of this necessarily, because it really is mostly good versus just one deck where these cover tons of matchups. So, and then Super Poly, I also think kind of depends on the deck you're playing, because you need the extra deck room more than likely. But I also think it's just like an okay option. Is it even that good? I don't know. Like, the main Fire King Snake Eye board in my deck, or in my head, this isn't that great. It's not really protecting you from getting puppet locked. Maybe it just depends on deck. Like, some decks can play this. I'll put it there. And Xyz Encore, not this format. Like, this is another card like Herald of the Abyss or Kaiju's, but is so specifically just Pearly that running this is like not worth it at all right now. This card was really good when you had Pearly to think about and Kashtira Arise Heart, because then it's doubling up versus 2 matchups. Right now, I think Xyz Encore is just not that great. And yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this board breaker tier list. Let me know your thoughts down below. If I missed any board breakers, feel free to leave that in the comments. I'll be sure to look at it. Again, I had to update this tier list after being gone so long, and I had to add some options, had to remove some options, but this is what I came up with. If I placed something wrong, leave that down below. How would you guys place these cards? Because, I mean, we haven't been in a board breaker format so long, it's sort of hard to predict what exactly is going to come back at the forefront of the board breaker meta, but I do think how I have it is like fine. Both meta and strong options, I'm saying, can be either mained or sided. So yeah, that's gonna be it for this tier list. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like and subscribe. This has been Aaron from Top Tier Gaming. Bye, YouTube.